My name is Aubyn Stahmer, as you heard, and I want to acknowledge my co-collaborators, Kelsey Oliver and Patty Shetter, who helped develop this information. I'm going to talk a little bit about recommendations for professional development across teachers, administrators, and school personnel. You heard earlier about the math achievement gap. I think you're going to find nice consistencies in our presentations. We have this California Schools dashboard, which has also shown a light on our students with disabilities. About 12% of students in the California system, over 700,000, qualify for special education and have an identified disability. And according to the California dashboard, students with disabilities are in the orange or the red in almost all areas, including English, math, college and career preparation, and absenteeism and graduation rates. So only about 10% are prepared for life after school, which is a challenge. These gaps are likely even greater for the very high proportion of students with disabilities who also live in poverty, foster care, or English language learners. So in order to support those students better, we think that professional development can really promote the use of evidence-based practices so that, which then can lead to improved student outcomes. The other advantage is that high quality professional development, mentoring, and support really increase teacher retention, and that might help address some of the attrition and teacher shortage challenges in special education. So here are our thoughts and recommendations in this area. The first is that all teachers need content about high incidence disabilities. Teachers report to us that they feel ill-equipped and underprepared to support students with disabilities, both in specialized and inclusive settings. So you see that quote from the general education teacher: "We spent too much time reading about students with disabilities, but not enough on how to structure the classroom to be individually responsive to student needs," which gets back to some things you heard earlier. We know that, as you can see from that figure, learning disabilities such as dyslexia and dysgraphia are the most common qualifying disabilities, followed by speech language impairment, autism, and other health impairment, which is primarily ADHD. So we know that many of the students in these high incidence disabilities have the cognitive skills and learning skills to be included in a regular education environment and use the general education curriculum, which means it's really important for general education teachers to understand their challenges, their strengths, and understand the disabilities generally so that they can support these students. So our recommendation in this area is to conduct basic introductory training for all educators in high incidence disabilities so they understand the common strengths and learning needs. The second area that's really important is attitudes and beliefs about evidence-based practice and inclusion. Research very strongly tells us that teachers who are open to learning new things are more likely to welcome training and coaching and to use those practices successfully. There may be, we know there are actually educators with unconscious bias that interferes with their willingness to use evidence-based practice and their willingness to include students with different learning abilities in their classrooms. For example, some of the things that teachers tell us when we ask them about it is that they might have a belief that students with disabilities have such significant academic and behavioral challenges that they can't be served in regular education. They may believe that including students with disabilities compromises the education of their other students in the classroom. They may not feel that these students are their responsibility or that they have the skills needed to educate those students effectively. And these beliefs can often lead to punitive practices and attributing behavior and learning challenges to the student's sort of attitude, oppositional behavior, rather than understanding the disorder. So we think that PD should focus on overcoming these unconscious biases and improving the understanding of cultural, neurological, and environmental causes of challenging behaviors, as well as learning deficits, so that there really is an understanding about why we want to include all students. We often think about training, didactic training, train and hope, as something that is our usual way of training, and these methods have really not led to improved practices or improved student outcomes. You can see in this figure there's a little bit of a gap between not knowing and knowing, but the gap between knowing and actually being able to do something is pretty wide. People don't often generalize their skills from a training into the classroom without some coaching and mentorship and greater experience in evidence-based practices. And oftentimes the people doing the training are really great at that evidence-based practice and have expertise with kids, but don't understand adult learning practices. And so we really need to help improve sustainment of all we're spending on these professional development opportunities by using evidence-based adult learning practices to teach the teachers what they need to know, as well as job-embedded coaching. Even teachers who have incredible attitudes toward evidence-based practice and inclusion need high-quality training, coaching, and feedback to perform successfully. We also need to be able to link what they're learning to the district and state performance goals so that it's relevant. And we want to look at PD effectiveness as much as we look at student outcomes. Is this working? So we're using good practices that are cost effective. It's also important, we think, to include paraprofessionals in professional development because they are doing a lot of the support. So what does high quality professional development look like? And there are lots of publications about this, but we start with information and then move quickly up to training, coaching, feedback, and support from leaders. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then for sustainment, the consultation and support and performance-based evaluation needs to be ongoing. Professional learning communities are one way teachers and professionals can support each other, as well as team-based problem solving and understanding how to do data-based decision-making about how this practice is working, both for the professional as well as for the student. And so, as you've heard, we would like to think about the multi-tiered system of support that's a framework that's often recommended by California to provide the necessary supports for all students based on their unique needs on this continuum from universally designed instruction to more highly intensive strategies. And one of the components of MTSS is that we use evidence-based practice in the context of response to intervention, which means data-based decision-making. And so we want to think about putting the training in evidence-based practices into this context of the larger school system so that it's not one extra thing for teachers, but a way to integrate it into what they're already doing. And so this is a tiered system of support, as you heard earlier. It includes the core school curriculum, positive behavior supports, UDL for about 80% of students, small group instruction, more intensive for 15%, and then that tier 3 for students who need more intensive, perhaps one-on-one instruction. And so our recommendation is that we provide, as you heard earlier, professional learning opportunities in tier 1, how to implement UDL so that students don't need to move up a tier and all teachers feel comfortable supporting students with disabilities in their classrooms. That we have tier 2 PD for staff who are going to be doing some more intensive group activities like intensive reading groups or social skills groups. And then tier 3 training for professionals who are specialist staff to ensure that they're trained to implement the interventions that are needed, as well as to coach other staff and using those in the context of the classroom. So this is providing more support for those students who need it. But again, lots of training in tier 1 so that we can really avoid moving up those tiers. And then, oh, I'm running out of time. So I want to make sure we don't forget to train leaders in how to support their providers. They need training in how to provide implementation support. Teachers and providers can't do it on their own. They need to learn how to put these evidence-based practices in the context of the system, measure them, and link the use back to the strategies and goals. And then I am done. Thank you.